The beautiful crystal towers of Velthora were falling apart as Commander THYSS stood at his window, watching everything he loved turn to ash. 3 days had passed since the Void Swarm came from nowhere, their giant black ships blocking out both suns that had warmed his world for millions of years. The sky looked wrong now, painted in shades of death instead of the gentle purple his people had always known. THYSS pressed his six-fingered hand against the cold glass and tried to understand how it had all gone so wrong so fast. The Velthori had always been a peaceful people. For thousands of years, they had spent their time building beautiful cities, creating art, and exploring the stars around them. Their weapons were simple tools made for cutting through asteroids and mining distant moons, not for fighting creatures that seemed to learn from every attack they made. "Commander, the last ship full of families just left the planet," said Kira, his assistant, as she walked into the room. Her 4 arms were shaking as another loud boom made their underground shelter rock back and forth. THYSS could see through the thick glass that the swarm robots were everywhere now, moving like angry metal insects across his world. Their sharp claws were cutting through anyone who had not made it to safety in time. The swarm creatures were unlike anything the Velthori had ever seen before. They looked like a mix of machine and living thing, with dark metal skin that changed and adapted every time the Velthori tried to fight them. When they shot their energy beams, the creatures just absorbed the power and became stronger. When they used their plasma cutters, the swarm grew new armor that could not be burned. It was like fighting an enemy that could not be hurt. "How many of our people got away?" THYSS asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. "Maybe 500,000, Kira said quietly. "But there were 10 million living on Velthora yesterday." THYSS closed his eyes for a moment. 9.5 million people gone in just 3 days. Mothers, fathers, children, grandparents, artists, teachers, scientists, all of them turned to dust by creatures that seemed to kill just because they could. The Velthori had tried to talk to the swarm, to ask what they wanted, to offer them anything they needed. But the creatures never answered. They just kept destroying everything in their path. "Send the message again," THYSS said, his voice sounding empty and tired. "Use every radio wave we have. Someone out there has to hear us." Kira nodded and walked over to their communication system. Her fingers moved quickly over the controls as she sent out the same desperate call they had been broadcasting for hours. The message went out into the dark space between stars, hoping that someone, somewhere, might be listening. "This is the Velthori Collective calling anyone who can hear this message. We are under attack by creatures we cannot fight. Our weapons do not work against them. They are killing our people and destroying our homes. We are begging for help. Please, if there is anyone out there who can save us, we need you now. We do not have much time left." As Kira sent the message, another explosion shook their bunker so hard that dust fell from the ceiling. The lights flickered on and off, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear the sound of metal being torn apart. The swarm was getting closer to their hiding place. THYSS looked out at what had once been the most beautiful city on his planet. The crystal spires that had taken centuries to grow were now broken stumps. The floating gardens where his people had walked and laughed were burning piles of ash. The great library where all their knowledge was kept had been reduced to rubble in the first hour of the attack. "Do you think anyone will come?" Kira asked, her voice small and scared. THYSS wanted to tell her yes, wanted to promise that help was on the way, but he had never been good at lying. The galaxy was a big place, and most of the species they knew about were just as peaceful as the Velthori. Even if someone did hear their call for help, what could they do against an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat? "I do not know," he said honestly. "But we have to keep trying. As long as we are still breathing, we have to believe that someone out there cares about what happens to people like us." The bunker shook again, harder this time, and they both knew that their time was running out. Captain Jake Mitchell stood in the command center of the TDF Yorktown, a massive warship that had seen more battles than most people could count. His face was marked with scars from years of fighting, and his hands were rough from working with weapons since he was old enough to hold them. He had played the strange alien message 5 times now, and each time it made his jaw clench tighter. The bridge around him was filled with the quiet hum of machines and the soft glow of computer screens showing star maps and weapon systems. Floating in the air in front of him were the faces of other ship captains, their images sharp and clear thanks to advanced technology that let them talk even though they were on different ships scattered across space. Captain Lisa Brooks commanded the Montana, a ship known for taking on impossible fights and winning them. Her short brown hair was pulled back tight, and her green eyes showed the same anger that Jake was feeling. Next to her image was Commander Tom Rodriguez from the Texas, a man whose gentle smile hid the fact that he was one of the deadliest fighters in the human fleet. Above them all was Admiral Rebecca Stone, the woman in charge of their entire Third Fleet, with 200 ships under her command. Earth Command is very clear about this, Admiral Stone said, her voice cold and official. We are not supposed to get involved in alien wars. These Velthari people are not our responsibility, and we have our own problems to worry about. Jake felt his hands ball into fists. He had grown up on a colony world where people helped each other because that was the only way anyone survived. The idea of ignoring someone's cry for help made him sick to his stomach. Admiral, with all due respect, Jake said, trying to keep his voice calm, we all took a promise when we joined this fleet. We swore to protect people who could not protect themselves. These Velthari did not choose to be attacked. They are not soldiers. They are just regular people trying to live their lives. The alien message had been playing on repeat in his head since they first heard it. The fear in the voice, the way it broke when talking about people dying, the desperate hope that someone might care enough to help. It reminded him of the distress calls his own colony had sent out years ago when pirates attacked them. Back then, no one had come to help, and Jake had watched his neighbors die while he hid in a basement. Captain Brooks leaned closer to her camera, her face serious. Jake is right about this. We have been sitting out here in space for months with nothing to do. Our Marines are getting restless, and our ships are ready for action. We have 200 warships and 30,000 soldiers who signed up to fight the bad guys. Well, here are some bad guys that need fighting. Commander Rodriguez nodded his agreement. My crew has been listening to that message too. Half of them are ready to mutiny if we do not go help those people. These void swarm creatures sound like exactly the kind of enemy we were built to fight. Admiral Stone was quiet for a long time, staring at something off camera. Jake knew she was thinking about all the rules and regulations that said they should not get involved. But he also knew that she had not gotten to her position by following every rule when good people were dying. The truth was, humans had been the underdogs for most of their history. They came from a planet that was constantly trying to kill them, where the weather could destroy cities and the animals were built for hunting. Every human alive was descended from people who had survived things that would have wiped out most other species. That experience had taught them something important: when someone is in trouble, you help them, because someday you might be the one needing help. You know what Earth Command will say about this, Admiral Stone finally said. They can court-martial me if they want, Jake replied. I would rather face a military trial than live with letting innocent people die when I could have saved them. Admiral Stone looked at each of the faces floating around her, seeing the same determination in all of them. These were not people who would back down from a fight, especially when the fight was to save lives. All right, she said, and Jake could hear the decision in her voice. All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump. We are going to show these void swarm creatures what happens when they attack people under human protection. As Jake watched his crew prepare their ship for the jump to alien space, he had no idea that their arrival would scare the Velthari almost as much as their enemies did. The space around Velthara suddenly filled with 200 human warships appearing out of nowhere, like ghosts becoming solid in the blink of an eye. Commander THYSS pressed his face against the bunker window and stared at the newcomers in complete shock. These ships were nothing like the beautiful, curved vessels his people built. They were dark and angular, covered in weapons that stuck out like the spines of some deadly creature. They looked like they had been built for one purpose only: war. By our ancestors, whispered Kira, his assistant, as she watched the human fleet spread out across the battlefield. What kind of beings are these? Before THYSS could answer, the human ships did something that made no sense at all. Small fighter craft began launching from the larger ships, and instead of staying back to fight safely, they dove straight into the middle of the void swarm formations. It looked like the humans were throwing their lives away for no reason. "They are committing suicide," THYSS said, unable to believe what he was seeing. Why would they come all this way just to throw their lives away? But then something amazing happened. The human fighters were not dying. Instead, they were tearing through the swarm ships like they were made of paper. Weapons that the Velthari had never seen before were cutting the enemy apart, and the adaptive armor that had made the swarm seem invincible was no match for whatever the humans were using. On one of the swarm ships, Sergeant Mike Davis and his squad of Marines were doing something that should have been impossible. They had somehow gotten inside an enemy vessel while it was still in space, in conditions that would kill any Velthari in seconds. Davis wore a thick metal suit that covered his entire body, making him look more like a robot than a living creature. "Move fast and hit hard," Davis shouted to his team as they forced their way through a door that the swarm had tried to seal. His weapon was unlike anything the Velthari used. Instead of energy beams that the swarm could absorb, it shot solid metal bullets that punched through the enemy's armor like it was not even there. The swarm creatures that had seemed so terrifying just hours before were falling down dead everywhere Davis and his team went. Their adaptive defenses meant nothing against weapons that worked by pure physical force. The humans had brought something the swarm had never faced before: simple, brutal violence that could not be adapted to or absorbed. "Contact on the left," one of Davis's Marines yelled, and the team turned as one to face a group of swarm drones trying to surround them. But these creatures that had slaughtered millions of Velthari were no match for humans who had grown up learning how to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than themselves. Meanwhile, in the vacuum of space, Lieutenant Commander Amy Foster was flying her small fighter through a field of floating rocks, chasing a swarm interceptor that was trying to escape. Her ship was moving so fast and turning so sharply that the forces involved should have crushed her body into paste. But humans had evolved on a world where surviving meant being tougher than seemed possible. "You made a big mistake coming to this part of the galaxy," Foster said to herself as she lined up her shot. The swarm ship tried to hide behind a large asteroid, but Foster followed it in a maneuver that would have been impossible for most other species to even attempt, let alone survive. Her weapons locked onto the enemy ship, and she pulled the trigger. The swarm interceptor exploded in a ball of fire and metal, just one more victory in a battle that was turning around faster than anyone had thought possible. Back in his bunker, THYSS watched in amazement as the tide of battle completely reversed itself. The void swarm, which had seemed unstoppable just hours before, was suddenly on the run. Ships that had been destroying everything in their path were now exploding or fleeing as fast as they could move. The humans fought like nothing THYSS had ever seen. They took risks that seemed insane, used weapons that worked in ways he did not understand, and moved through dangerous situations like they had been born for war. Where the Velthari had been gentle and peaceful, these newcomers were violent and aggressive in ways that made the swarm look tame by comparison. "They are predators," Kira said quietly, watching a human ship ram straight into a swarm cruiser and somehow survive the collision. "But they are predators who came to help us." For the first time in days, THYSS allowed himself to hope that his people might actually survive this nightmare. 3 days had passed since the human fleet had driven off the void swarm, and Commander THYSS was finally able to leave his underground bunker for the first time in almost a week. What he saw when he stepped outside broke his heart all over again. The beautiful crystal city of Velthara was nothing but rubble and ash. The towers that had taken his people centuries to grow were now twisted metal and broken glass scattered across the ground. But standing in the middle of all that destruction was something THYSS had never expected to see up close: a human being. Captain Jake Mitchell was enormous compared to the Velthari, easily twice as tall and 3 times as wide. His skin was marked with old scars that told stories of fights and battles, and his hands looked like they could crush stone without effort. Everything about him screamed danger. Yet when the human turned to look at THYSS, his eyes were kind, and when he spoke through the small translation device clipped to his uniform, his voice was surprisingly gentle. "Commander THYSS, I presume," Mitchell said, extending one massive hand in what THYSS had learned was a human greeting. "We came as soon as we received your distress call. I wish we could have arrived sooner. I am deeply sorry that we could not save more of your people." THYSS stared at the offered hand for a moment before carefully reaching out with his own six-fingered appendage. The human's grip was firm but careful, like he understood exactly how much stronger he was and was being gentle on purpose. "Captain Mitchell," THYSS said, his voice still shaky from everything he had witnessed. "Your species fought those creatures like they were nothing. We tried for days and could barely scratch them, but you destroyed them in hours." Mitchell's scarred face grew serious. "We have experience dealing with things that want to kill us. Too much experience, unfortunately." THYSS had been thinking about this question for 3 days, and now he finally had the courage to ask it. "Your people, you are predators like the swarm, are you not? I have seen how you fight, how you move, how you think about violence. You come from a world of hunters and killers." For a moment, Mitchell's expression grew dark, and THYSS wondered if he had insulted this powerful being who had saved his world. But then the human's face softened again. "Yes, we are predators," Mitchell said quietly. "Every human alive comes from a long line of creatures that survived by being better hunters than anything else on our planet. But here is the important difference between us and the swarm: we chose to use that strength to protect others instead of just killing for the sake of killing." Before THYSS could respond, another human stepped forward. This one was smaller and wore the white coat that THYSS had learned meant she was some kind of scientist or doctor. Her name tag read Dr. Susan Palmer, and unlike the soldiers THYSS had seen, she carried no weapons at all. "Commander THYSS," Dr. Palmer said with a smile that reminded him of his own people, "we would like to offer some assistance to help you rebuild. We have defensive technologies that could protect your remaining colonies from future attacks. Force fields that can stop adaptive weapons, armor plating that gets stronger when it is hit, early warning systems that can detect enemies before they arrive." THYSS was confused. "I do not understand. Why would you give us these things? What do you want in return?" The question seemed to surprise both humans. They looked at each other like THYSS had asked why water was wet or why stars were bright. "We do not want anything," Mitchell said simply. "We help because that is what decent people do when they see others in trouble." "But surely you must want something," THYSS pressed. "Trade agreements, mining rights, territory, military alliances. No species gives away valuable technology for free." Dr. Palmer shook her head. "Commander, humans have a saying, with great power comes great responsibility. We are strong, so we have a duty to protect those who are weaker. Not because we gain anything from it, but because it is the right thing to do." THYSS felt something he had not experienced in days: hope. These strange, violent, dangerous creatures had come from across the galaxy not for profit or conquest, but simply because they had heard someone crying for help. "Your species is very unusual," THYSS said. "We get that a lot," Mitchell replied with what THYSS was learning was a human expression of humor. But even as they talked, Kira came running from the communications center, her 4 arms waving frantically. "Commander," she called out, her voice full of fear. "Our long-range sensors are picking up massive energy signatures approaching from deep space. It looks like the swarm is coming back, and this time they are bringing a lot more ships." Mitchell's expression immediately changed from friendly to deadly serious. "How many ships are we talking about?" "At least 1,000, maybe more," Kira replied. The human captain was quiet for a moment, then turned to THYSS. "Commander, I think it is time we taught your people how to fight back." 6 months had passed since the first Void Swarm attack, and Commander THYSS barely recognized his own people anymore. The gentle, peace-loving Veltari who had once spent their days creating art and studying the stars had been transformed into something completely different. They still looked the same on the outside, with their 6 fingers and 4 arms and soft purple skin, but inside they had become something harder, something deadlier. HFY stood on the bridge of the new Veltari command ship, wearing armor that human engineers had designed specifically for his people. It was sleek and silver, fitting perfectly over his alien body, but it was built with the same brutal efficiency that marked everything humans made. The gentle eyes that had once looked at the universe with wonder and curiosity were now sharp and alert, constantly scanning for threats. Beside him stood Admiral Rebecca Stone, the human commander who had spent the last 6 months teaching the Veltari how to survive in a galaxy that was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Her weathered face was calm as she watched the enemy fleet approaching on the main screen, but HFY had learned to read human expressions well enough to see the cold anger burning behind her eyes. 1,047 ships, reported Kira, who now served as the weapons officer instead of just being an assistant. Her 4 arms moved quickly across the control panels, operating systems that would have been impossible for her to understand just months ago. They outnumber us 3-1. Good, Admiral Stone said quietly. That means they are confident. Confident enemies make mistakes. The approaching Void Swarm fleet was enormous, a black cloud of death spreading across the star field like some terrible disease. They had come expecting to finish what they had started, to wipe out the remaining Veltari and claim their worlds for the swarm. What they did not know was that the Veltari they were about to face were not the same species they had nearly destroyed 6 months ago. Remember what we taught you, Stone said to HFY, her voice carrying the weight of all the hard lessons the humans had shared. Show mercy to those who cannot defend themselves, but give no quarter to those who choose to prey on the innocent. HFY nodded, his hand resting on the firing controls for weapons that his people had never imagined they would need to use. The past 6 months had been the hardest time in Veltari history. The humans had not just given them new technology and weapons. They had taught them how to think like predators, how to see violence as a tool to be used when necessary, how to make the terrible choice to take a life in order to save many lives. It had not been easy. Many of his people had struggled with concepts that went against everything they had believed about the universe. But they had learned, because the alternative was extinction. Under human guidance, they had rebuilt their military from nothing, created new types of ships designed for war instead of exploration, and trained soldiers who could fight with the same brutal efficiency as their human teachers. All ships, prepare for battle, HFY said into his communication system, speaking to both Veltari and human vessels scattered across the battle zone. His voice was steady and confident in a way that would have been impossible before the humans arrived. The Void Swarm fleet moved into attack position, their ships forming the same patterns they had used to destroy countless other species. But this time, they were not facing helpless civilians with mining equipment. This time, they were facing an enemy that had been trained by the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. The battle began with a coordinated strike that caught the swarm completely off guard. Veltari ships, now equipped with human-designed weapons, opened fire with kinetic cannons that punched through adaptive armor like it was made of glass. Human vessels moved in perfect coordination with their alien allies, their crews working together like they had been fighting side by side for years instead of months. Target their command ships first, Stone ordered, and HFY relayed the command to the fleet. This was another lesson the humans had taught them: cut off the head of the enemy, and the body will fall. The swarm had expected to face the same gentle creatures they had slaughtered before. Instead, they found themselves fighting against an enemy that used their own tactics against them, that struck hard and fast and showed no mercy to those who had shown no mercy to others. Veltari pilots flew their ships with a precision and aggression that would have shocked their ancestors, diving into enemy formations and fighting in ways that their peaceful culture had never imagined. As the battle raged, HFY watched his people prove that they had learned the most important lesson humanity had to offer: sometimes, to protect what you love, you have to become something terrible. The tide of battle turned quickly. The swarm, faced with an enemy they did not understand and could not adapt to fast enough, began to retreat. But the Velthari, guided by human strategy, did not let them escape. They pursued the fleeing ships and destroyed them, making sure that this threat would never return to harm innocent people again. When the last swarm ship exploded in a ball of fire and metal, HFYSS turned to Admiral Stone with a mixture of pride and sadness in his eyes. "We have become something we never were before," he said quietly. "Something our ancestors would not recognize." Stone placed a gentle hand on his armored shoulder. "You have become what you needed to be. Strong enough to protect the things that matter to you." In the days that followed, the Velthari Collective would officially join the Terran Alliance, becoming the first alien species to learn humanity's most important lesson, that sometimes, the only way to preserve peace is to be prepared for war.